Pacers beat the Pistons without Tyrese Haliburton. It might have been against a poor team, but anyone without Haliburton big for the Pacers. How'd they get it done? How'd they look without Mathurin for the first time? Plus, let's look ahead at the Pacers cap space this summer. All coming today on the Locked On Pacers podcast.
You are Locked On Pacers, your daily Indiana Pacers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome in to another edition of the Locked On Pacers podcast, where we, of course, talk about the Indiana Pacers. As always, my name's Tony East. I cover the team for Forbes and SI, and today we're diving into the weekend of hoops that was for the Pacers. A win in Detroit is the big picture, the small picture, a ton of little things to get out of this game. Haliburton doesn't play, and the Pacers still going to win. That's huge for them this season. Mathurin doesn't play for the first time of the entire season. Significant for the Pacers, what they learned about how they play without him and who will need to step up in his absence. Plus, to close out today's show, I want to finally look ahead at cap space this summer. I got my cap stuff all updated a couple of weeks ago and haven't talked about it since the trades. Why not do it now that it's been a month and it's a good time between two games against the Pistons? And speaking of games against the Pistons, a good one for the Pacers on Saturday night, a 121-115 win. And just looking at the score means nothing, because beating the Pistons at this stage of the season without their three best players really, in Cade Cunningham, Bojan Bogdanovic, and Alec Burks, sort of meaningless. They've lost over 10 games in a row. They're not playing well. They're playing a lot of young guys, some of which they just signed, like Eugene Omoraui, and they're just not a very good team. And yet, when the Pacers play without Tyrese Haliburton, they're also not a good team. And that was the case for the Pacers in this game, but that is not the full story to tell. Myles Turner did not play. TJ McConnell did not play. Myles Turner and TJ McConnell both dealing with back injuries. Rick Carlisle saying that McConnell's always a little banged up. Good time to get him some rest. Turner's back thing was something that he had before the Sixers game. I don't know if it's the exact same injury, but that was what he was on the injury report with. And then Haliburton banged knees on the final shot of regulation against the Rockets last Thursday. He played the OT period, hobbled, and was amazing. And then it turns out that injury made his left knee a little sore. He missed this game, and it sounds like all three of those guys could miss the second Pistons game. And Buddy Hield is now listed as questionable, so Monday night's game could be something. Either way, that is setting the scene for what the Pacers were dealing with. They were without those three guys. They were also without Mathurin. Both of their two-way guys were out. So that's 5 missed players for this game. Tice ends up not playing. They were just down several bodies, so they only had 10 available, or 10 guys to play in this game. And so at first I thought, well, maybe there won't be a ton to learn without Mathurin, because it's just a very hobbled rotation, but still an interesting performance from the Pacers. And just looking big picture at this game, I think the standout thing to me, if I had to really describe what happened in this game, is you got to see more of something I talked about last week, which is Andrew Nembhard running the point, right? He got to play point guard a ton with no McConnell and no Haliburton. George Hill backed him up in this game, but something I talked about with Nembhard last week, he's been struggling of late shooting the ball specifically, is I still think he's better when he's in an actualized role with the ball in his hands. At Gonzaga, with Team Canada, high school level, growing up, he's always been a point guard. And for stretches of this season, much earlier in the season, he was drilling these shots, and he's still a good defender. He has been all year, so he found a role as an off-ball guard with the starters. But that sort of waned in importance when his shot wasn't falling. And I said, well, I think that makes sense, because he's better with the ball in his hands. And in this game, he reminded everybody exactly why that's the case. The shot was He shot 6 of 15, led the team in shot attempts, although he had a brilliant first half. His second quarter run was huge in getting the Pacers a lead that ended up being very important in this game, because they gave it away later. But his passing was brilliant. 8 assists, 1/3 of the team's full assists, was able to operate the team's offense in a way that you could tell he has those point guard skills. He basically led the team in minutes, 3 seconds behind Chris Duarte for technically doing so. And him and Isaiah Jackson showed some fantastic chemistry with lobs, pick and roll stuff in general. Jackson playing in front of a home crowd, literally. I think Kristen Arian and Quinn Buckner said on the broadcast he had 60 tickets. He's a Michigan native that he requested for this game. to get friends and family in the arena. And then Nembhard at point guard, those things together in tandem were looking fantastic. I think that was my biggest takeaway from this game, was seeing Andrew Nembhard in that role again was something that the Pacers haven't done in a while, right? Obviously, that Golden State game in Golden State will stand out to everyone for forever and ever. But there were other chances he had to run the show that didn't go that well, but still went okay. This game was another reminder of that. And I dug into the stats a little after this game. With Nembhard on the floor and neither McConnell nor Haliburton on the court, Nembhard's averaging 15.3 points per 36 minutes and 9.8 assists per 36. As a rookie, those are pretty good numbers, right? He does a good job finding his spots and finding his teammates when he's running the show, and he did in this game, and that was huge for the Pacers to, despite being very shorthanded, have a steadying hand and a leader out there to keep things organized and keep things running. Like, they still did a good job sharing the ball despite not having their guys who typically set stuff up and get into the paint. McConnell and Haliburton are the only two guys on this team who average over 10 drives a game. Nembhard had to do that in this game, and he almost had 20, right? He did a good job coming in, playing the Pacers style, running the show, and keeping things rolling. And I think that was really important for the Pacers. When they're shorthanded, it's really hard for them to play their style, their identity, play to the way they play when Haliburton's out there. But Nembhard was really good in this game, and he was the first guy that I wanted to talk about. But really, there's so many guys that were key to this win. And that was my second note of things I wanted to point out, is different guys stepped up at different times. Isaiah Jackson had 9 points in the first quarter, right? He was huge in this game. He started, he was 7 for 10. He had 11 boards, 2 steals, 2 blocks, 1 assist, doing all the stuff that makes you feel like Isaiah Jackson can still be special. At his absolute best, his perimeter defense was solid. He was finishing plays around the basket. But also, Jalen Smith, the other young big, was fantastic as well. 7 for 11, 9 boards, 1 assist, 2 blocks himself. And Jalen Smith had the biggest stretch of the game. It was tied entering the fourth quarter. Jalen Smith scores 11 points in the first half of that fourth quarter to reestablish the Pacers lead. Both young bigs were really good. I thought that was important with Myles Turner out, that one of them would step up, and they both did. They were both excellent. They even shared the court for a few moments in this game. And how about James Johnson finishing out the center rotation with maybe his best performance against a non-Nets team this season? He played over 21 minutes, 8 points, 5 rebounds, 3 assists. And you could go through a lot of guys, and that was my second takeaway beyond the young bigs, is everybody who played basically had a moment in the game where they stepped up and were very important to the Pacers, right? And did a key thing. Buddy Hield early, Nesmith's defense often, and same with Duarte's. George Hill was a steadying hand. I just talked about Johnson, Smith, and Jackson. O'Shea Brissett and Jordan Nwora both scored double-digit points. Like, it was really a total team effort, and it had to be. They were missing so many key guys who usually keep the show running and make it a team that can win games. They were playing Detroit, but even so, when I saw that those 3 guys weren't going to play, I thought this was going to be tough for the Pacers, but they found a way to get it done. And I thought it was fascinating that 2 guys who very rarely play or even are in the rotation, George Hill and James Johnson, were able to be very steadying hands, both of them hitting exactly half of their shots. George Hill with 5 assists. James Johnson was doing a lot of good stuff at the big man spot, being a bully against the Pistons' second unit. Those 2 guys stepping up was huge. They never play, right? The fact that they were able to get in and fill in as a reserve in a way that typically you don't see from them, I think was really important for the Pacers, in this game. So it's really hard to point to anyone that you'd say was disappointing in total, right? Nesmith and Duarte were struggling to finish a little bit. The third quarter, the Pacers really struggled in general. In fact, if you go through the game flow, Pacers started off great. They were up 12 at halftime, had an abysmal first 4 minutes of the third quarter, and then were fine the rest of the game. But that stretch was killer. It was a classic Pacers game where they couldn't put a team away despite a strong start. But they really did show force the whole game. They kept the ball moving. They looked like a connected group. And so without 2 of their best ball handlers and a key play finisher and defender in Turner, it was really fun just to see all these bench guys kind of step in and connect and make it happen and keep the ball moving and keep things going, especially with Mathurin out as well, a guy who usually is a really good play finisher, especially against a team that can give you a lot of broken defense opportunities. So I think the big takeaway for me, and something I'll be watching again, as Haliburton's already listed out, so was McConnell, is Nembhard at the 1. But any win to me without Tyrese Haliburton is good for the Pacers at this point in the season. And they got it in Detroit on Saturday night. A whole team effort spearheaded by 3 youngsters, Nembhard, Jackson, and Smith. But credit to everybody. Everybody stepped into a role that is a little bit different than what they typically have to do because of how many guys were out, and they all answered that calling in a win. They'll have to do it again tonight. We'll be talking about that tomorrow. But the second segment today, first game without Bennedict Mathurin. of the season. Did we learn anything? What kind of tweaks could we see? Might be a little tough with the rotation that we ultimately saw from the Pacers in this game, but I still want to talk about it. Before we do that, though, let me talk to you guys about PrizePicks. PrizePicks is daily fantasy made easy. It's such a fun way to play daily fantasy sports. You pick 2 to 6 players. Will they score more or less in their PrizePicks projection? You can up to 25 times your money on any entry. No competing against other people. It's you versus the projections available. That's what I love about it. You don't get out researched by someone else. It's just you and your research versus PrizePicks. They offer projections on any sport you watch for any league. You can make your entries in 60 seconds or less. It's easy. It's safe, it has fast withdrawals, and it's operational in over 30 states and Canada. So download the PrizePicks app or go to prizepicks.com to sign up and play daily fantasy sports. First-time users can receive a 100% instant deposit match up to $100 with the promo code LOCKEDON. If you deposit $100, PrizePicks will give you $100. If you deposit $50, PrizePicks will give you $50. You get the idea, but don't forget to enter that promo code LOCKEDON and sign up for an instant deposit match up to $100 at PrizePicks Daily Fantasy, made easy. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, check out Locked On Pistons. Hear what Kuka Hill has to say about what the heck's going on with Detroit. They can't win right now. Veterans are sitting. I think they're at the point of the season where their fate is very obvious, but that many losses in a row can still be tough on a team. Ku will break down everything you need to know about the Central Division foe for the Pacers and their opponent tonight. Thought this game was interesting because it was the first Bennedict Mathurin-less game for the Pacers, and I was looking forward to kind of seeing how Carlisle would tweak the rotation ever so slightly. And that thinking came mostly during the Rockets game and after it, before we knew that so many guys would not be playing. But in my head, it was, does Duarte become more of a finisher with the second unit? Does Nesmith get more guard reps with the second unit? Does George Hill just get playing time? Maybe Trevelyan Queen sneaks in there. Like, how do they decide to fill this role? That's a lot of shots to fill. That's a lot of touches to fill. That's an important drive to the basket role to fill with the second unit. You need kind of a scoring punch. How are they going to do it? How would they tweak things? In the end, without 2 other guards, it became a little harder to assess exactly how that adjustment was made because Duarte ended up starting without other guys available for this game. A completely changed rotation since Nembhard had to change positions as a starter. They needed a starter at the 2 instead of the 1. It's not, you get how the rotation change works, but in the end, Duarte started instead, and he led the team in minutes, was struggling a little with his finishing. We'll talk more about him in a second, but that was what I was curious about. And I don't think we'll have all the answers on that sort of stuff right away. And to this point, we don't even have really a timetable on Mathurin. It sounds like that's not something that Carlisle was willing to share. Jeremiah Johnson was talking about it on the broadcast, but so it's hard to get a real feel for what this looks like because like George Hill even played. Trevelyan Queen, I don't think, was with the Pacers even for this game. So rotationally, it's really tough to say, but I think the biggest thing is something I mentioned earlier in terms of play style that I'm curious about, and that's drives to the basket, right? Who is going to do it? Mathurin is 3rd on the Pacers this season in drives per game. That's a big thing to lose. The only 2 guys ahead of him are the point guards, Haliburton and McConnell, who get in the paint because they're trying to set up teammates, keep the offense moving, keep the actions going, whatever they have to do to set things in motion. Mathurin's drives are more about play finishing, but they're still important. They bend the defense. They make stuff happen. And like I talked about last week, after the Bulls game, Rick Carlisle, very complimentary of his second unit because recently they've been moving the ball better. And it's not just that helps the team, but it keeps everybody engaged. It keeps everybody doing what they're doing in a way that's been meaningful for Mathurin and Duarte, who both have been playing well, right? So I was curious how the drives, the passing, all that would be backfilled. And in this game, it was fascinating because only one player exceeded 10 drives per game, and that was Nembhard. And that doesn't hardly count as a Mathurin replacement to me because he was doing what I talked about with the other 2 point guards. He was the initiator, get in the paint, bend the defense, break the defense, whatever, spray it out, throw a lob, whatever you have to do to keep things moving. So he wasn't really replacing Mathurin. The second highest drives guy was Buddy Hield, who often, when guys are out, is tasked with more rim attacks. In San Antonio, for example, with Haliburton out, he had 27 points. He was attacking the rim a ton. He had 8 drives in this game. That's barely over what Mathurin averages per game this season. Everybody else was below Mathurin's average. James Johnson was 3rd on the Pacers in drives in this game, right? That is where I think I didn't see a lot of that. I saw less of that. It was a lot more pick and roll stuff, space it out on the perimeter and pass it in and play through post a little bit more when Johnson was in there or Smith was in there, for example. And there was, drive data from one game can be a little fluky, and transition was a big factor in this game. All sorts of stuff that don't make the drive numbers perfect. And the Pacers also got a lot of buckets from offensive rebounds, for example. They did a great job on the glass in this game, that let them get out in transition, right? So the drive numbers aren't the same as they are for the average Pacers game, but I was intrigued to see that they weren't attacking as much with a scoring mindset as much as they do with Mathurin in there. Not that one strategy is better or worse, but that was where I was curious how the Pacers would replace him, and they didn't really do anything that much differently in terms of like having one player up his drive volume. Instead, they just kind of played to the strengths of the guys they had out there, with Buddy Hield taking on a little bit more responsibility in that way, and Nembhard taking over a ton as the distributor and enhancement to offensive player. That said, the ball movement was still very good, especially given who's available, right? A lot of lineups with not much chemistry in this game. Pacers still had 24 assists, were moving it well enough to keep their offense moving. And like I said, Carlisle's been stressing that, right? With the second group, TJ McConnell talked about film sessions being super important for that group to build that chemistry moving the ball. They did a good job still doing that despite having different guys coming in and out or playing roles that are either different or way larger than they're used to, right? I credit to Quinn and Chris, they're always excellent, but in this game specifically, a couple times they would note when a player came out because they were gassed. James Johnson, Jalen Smith are two that I remember off the top of my head, but that they're playing way more minutes than they're used to, right? You're going to be tired, and especially when you're playing well and giving a lot of energy, right? So that's the result of a changed rotation, and yet the Pacers still did a good job kind of moving the ball. So I'll be curious going forward if those things stay similar, where no one really ups their drive volume and the Pacers just kind of play to the strengths of the guys they have without Mathurin playing, or if someone else steps up in that realm. Maybe it's Chris Duarte, maybe it's Buddy Hield. We'll see. And I'll be curious if when the rotation returns to normal, how things look in terms of ball movement, things like that. The other part of this I want to talk about is I commented this on last Friday's YouTube video version of the podcast. Who needs to step up with Bennedict Mathurin now? And I would say a majority of the responses said Duarte. And I agree. If the full team was healthy, I think he's the guy with the second unit that would be tasked more with finishing plays and doing some of the stuff that Mathurin can do in terms of being a threat with the ball and a guy that defenses have to really worry about as a scorer. I still view Duarte as more of a shooter than a scoring type myself, but he would be the guy that I agree with most of those comments that needs to step up a little bit in that way. Now, there's two ways to look at his game. In this one, he did take a lot of shots. He took 11. He led the team in minutes. He also was struggling a little bit to put the ball in the basket. His shot looked a little off in this game. He was 2 for 11. He didn't have a single assist. He did well on the glass. He defended well. It's not like he was completely miserable the whole game, but he did have a pretty crummy offensive night. I think he's someone that when the rotation is stable again and some of these vets that are out are back, it'll be very important to see how he operates with the second group, perhaps Thursday in Milwaukee. I don't know when all these guys are coming back, but that could be a day to look at and say, this is a day Chris Duarte needs to, step up a bit in his impact or change the way he's playing a little more. But I could not agree more with those commenters. I think that is a guy who, he's been figuring out playing in that team environment and this like recently in the way that they've been stressing passing, not that he was really struggling with anything, but he's been doing much better in that area and helping that second unit. So if he can continue to do that and add a little bit with Mathurin out, that'll be important. And the other part of this, if I had to pick anyone beyond Duarte, it's whoever the new guard will be with the second unit, right? Because someone has to be the backup too. Maybe it's they put in a new player and it's George Hill. George Hill can kind of play off the ball. Remember when George Hill was with the Pacers before, there was a lot of talk about people saying he is a two guard. He wasn't, but that was what people would say because he can shoot it, he can defend, right? He can play the two fine. So maybe George Hill gets in there. Maybe it's Aaron Nesmith comes with the second unit a little bit and guards some twos or guards some threes, and Duarte guards some twos. And then there's less Nesmith with the starters as a result because his minutes shift, and like Nwora or Brissett or someone gets more time with the starting five. I don't know exactly how that shift. Maybe, like I mentioned earlier, Trevelin Queen could sniff on in there. I don't know. But I'm curious how that shift happens and what player is then tasked with doing well in a different role. My hunch, given what we've seen so far, is it would be Nesmith, but perhaps Hill could sneak in there. And I'll be looking to see which one of those guys can do well and what that means. It's hard to say it from just one game where the rotation was totally unique, what that's going to look like. But that's going to be something important to monitor. And Warren, in general, I think, is key here to see if he can be more of a scorer finisher type. He'll get more chances with Mathurin out going forward. In this game, he had 9 shot attempts in only 16 minutes. He was actually, of the 10 guys who played, the guy who played the least minutes, and yet he still did a pretty solid job. And so if he gets more opportunities going forward, what does that end up looking like? I'll be very curious to know. So still a lot to learn about what the Pacers without Mathurin will look like, right? Because of how many other guys were out in this game. But I think there was kind of glimpses of what they want to do, what it's going to look like, what strengths they're going to push with their strong young ball handler out of the game. But we'll see. We have another opportunity to see what this will look like for the Pacers tonight. That said, if Buddy Hield doesn't play, he is questionable. Man, it's going to be very interesting to see how the Pacers get a rotation. I'm almost certain if Buddy Hield doesn't play, that Trevelyan Queen will have to get some minutes just to have enough guards out there to play and handle the ball. But we'll see. Pacers Pistons again tonight. We'll, of course, be breaking that down among many things tomorrow. I want to close out today's show with a topic I've wanted to do for a few weeks now, but haven't had a good segment chance. Talking about the Pacers this summer cap space. I updated my cap sheet a couple weeks ago after the trade deadline, but wanted to look ahead a little bit at this time as we continue into the season. A little less than a month to go now in the regular season, which is crazy to think about. Before we get to that, though, let me quickly talk to you guys about Built Bar, because the Built March Madness bracket is here. I know you have a favorite bar or puff. Mine is peanut butter brownie. Now it's time to make it count. Go to BuiltMarchMadness.com to vote for your favorites. If you're voting for my favorite, the peanut butter brownie, or if you want to vote for the coconut one or the churro one, whatever, or the Pacers to win, you'll be voting for that bar to support your own team. You can support a bar or puff at the same time. And when we vote for your favorite bar or puff, you'll be entered into a drawing where 50 lucky Locked On listeners will get a free box of Built. Not only that, but Locked On fans will receive a 12-month subscription to Built to have Built's best bars or puffs delivered monthly straight to your door. You got to try Built Bar, the best protein bar ever. They're so amazing, you won't think they're good for you. What makes them so good? Well, they're all high in protein, low in sugar, and covered in 100% real chocolate. Run to BuiltMarchMadness.com right now to vote for your favorite bar or puff and pick up a box while you're there. You can vote every day in March, so hop in and support your pick. Thank you, as always, for making Locked On Pacers your first listen today and every single day. For your second listen, hop on over to Locked On Kings. Matt George will break down the Beam team and their run to second in the West. Unbelievable how well Sacramento's been playing, and they're super fun, and Mike Brown's a great coach, and former Pacer Domantas Sabonis is killing it. Lots of fun stuff to get from Matt George over at Locked On Kings. Let's close out today talking about cap space. I have this list of topics I want to do a segment on when I get a chance during the season. This has been there for a couple weeks. I fell behind a little on this, but the trade deadline was about a month ago now, and the Pacers did change their long-term cap space outlook. And there's a couple things I want to talk about with this as time progresses. But I tweeted this. It's on my Twitter page at TEastNBA. But as it stands right now, Pacers are looking at big cap space this summer. How much? TBD. We'll walk through it all together. So what changed for the Pacers in their 2023 summer at the trade deadline, right? They got rid of Terry Taylor. He didn't have any money guaranteed beyond this season. They got rid of Goga Bitadze. Same thing. No guaranteed money beyond this season. They waived Serge Ibaka, who, you get it, you get the trend, had no guaranteed money beyond the season. And they waived James Johnson, who had no guaranteed money beyond the season. And then they signed him again to a contract with no guaranteed money beyond this season. So of their little waivers and signings they didn't change their long-term cap outlook. They just added money this year. But they also brought in 2 players. George Hill comes in with his $4 million on the books for the rest of this season, although I would add that there's no money next season, right? None added for the next year. And then Jordan Nwora being the final piece. He's a $3 million cap hit this year, although his cash paid could be less because he has a bonus for $200,000 that requires making the second round of the playoffs. And if that doesn't happen this season for the Pacers, his cap hit next year would go down by that $200,000 amount because that bonus would then be considered unlikely. But he is still key in this equation because Jordan Nwora does have guaranteed money on his contract for next season at least that $3 million amount. If you think the Pacers won't make the second round, you can pen that in. I just pencil it in because of who I am as a person. But either way, that is where the Pacers cap projections changed for the coming summer as they added Nwora's money onto the books. They didn't subtract any. None of the guys they got rid of had money next year. They didn't get rid of anybody with contract money on the books, but they did add $3 million of Jordan Nwora. If he was a free agent in the 2023 summer and the Pacers gave him a $3 million deal with a $200,000 bonus for making the second round on a one-year deal, I think everybody would be totally fine with that value, right? So it's a totally fine thing for them to add, especially in their situation. But that's where the Pacers' salary situation changed at the trade deadline. But that's it. Everything else basically stayed static. Their planning that they've done to stay flexible yet add talent, kind of that's what it looked like at the deadline. So where does that put them? Well, next season they have less than $100 million of guaranteed salaries, because the big difference is, remember, they have a lot right now, a little over $110 million. Might be a little higher than that, but about that. But Myles Turner's deal, because of that renegotiation and extension, where his hit goes way up this year and then drops by 40% next year, it's $13 million less. So the Pacers could be a huge cap space team this summer. Myles Turner at $21 million, Buddy Hield at about 19.5, depending on some bonuses. Tice at 9, McConnell just under 9, Mathurin at just under 7, Jalen Smith at 5, Haliburton at 6, Chris Duarte at 4, Aaron Nesmith at 6, Nwora at 3, Isaiah Jackson at 2.5, and Andrew Nembhard at 2. Those are the guaranteed players on the Pacers next season, right? And that's 12 guys. The only 3 expiring contracts being James Johnson, O'Shea Brissett, and George Hill. And those 12 guys amount to about $94 million, in guaranteed salary. Currently, salary cap max projections of a 10% increase, because that was the negotiated amount between the league and the teams during COVID, would put it at $136 million for the salary cap, which means if you look at that right now, you'd go, wow, the Pacers could have $42 million in cap space. And yes, as things stand right this second, technically that is correct. But let's talk about that. Let's contextualize that. Don't get ahead of yourself for the offseason, because the draft is before free agency. And first-round picks make a lot of money, right? The Pacers will presumably, if they make the playoffs, it'll be whatever, 15, 16, 17. But either way, their own pick in the first round, like think about Bennedict Mathurin. They picked him 6th in the draft. His first-year rookie salary is $6.5 million. And rookie scale deals get more expensive every year. If they get a top, whatever, 5, 6, 7 pick, that's another $7-ish million player. If it's a top 1, 2, 3 pick, it's way higher than that even, right? So that cuts into your $43 million of space. And the Cavs pick and the Celtics pick, should they be made, would also add, $2.5 million to the books. And so it's not actually possible to know how much space the Pacers will have. That said, if they make all 3 picks, pencil in a maximum there of like $15 million in player salaries from rookies, that's still $28 million in space to play with, right? So it's safe to assume that at the very least, if the Pacers do nothing, they'll have a lot of cap space to play with in the offseason. But again, let me stop your line of thinking that I don't know what you're thinking about, but let me stop it and throw another thing in there. Pretend the Pacers do what I just said. They draft with those 3 first-round picks. And then their second rounders, they trade for second rounders in a future season. And I only say they do that because they only have 3 roster spots. If they lose George Hill, they lose James Johnson, they lose O'Shea Brissett, and they fill that with 3 rookies, they're done. That's their whole team. But I don't think the Pacers would like to sit out free agency, especially with that much cap space. It's burning a hole in your pocket at that point. You might as well use it on an asset or find a way to use it in a way that they have to reach the salary floor somehow, or find a way to use it to take in players in trades. And so the Pacers seem exceedingly likely, over 60, 70%, to make some sort of trade in the offseason of a player or 2 for 1 or a player or 2 for none, to either get different assets or clear roster spots so they can sign somebody or get a non-guaranteed deal on the books to have some flexibility, or do whatever they want to do. There's a lot of ways this could go. But either way, roster spots might be valuable for them. They might end up with 5 draft picks and not enough spots for them. That's even before free agency. But they're too good to sit out free agency, and they're below the salary floor, which requires them to add money to their team. Those factors in like going together means the Pacers are going to be a trade team. And so if I'm someone thinking about the Pacers cap space this summer, I would say $28 million is probably the floor of what they'll have. But it could all drastically change because the way this team's roster spot situation is set up, the way their draft pick situation is set up, and the way the salary floor is set up, and with how ahead of schedule they might have become, they are ripe to make moves. And so, if someone asks me how much space the Pacers are going to have this summer, I usually say between 25 and 40 million, depending on some factors. But it's impossible to pinpoint a specific number. It's possible to look at their team sheet and say, you know what, here's some guys that make sense to keep or not keep, and here's what they need and don't need. And maybe it depends where they landed the draft, what direction they decide to go with their space or whatever they do. But their cap space situation right now still looks pretty good. Lots of space, lots of flexibility. They just got to figure out how to use it. And this summer is going to be completely fascinating on that front. I'll be covering it all here on the Locked On Pacers podcast. Tomorrow, we'll be talking Pistons. What happened in the game? What did we learn? All sorts of stuff. And we'll do our weekly standings watch tomorrow. And then Wednesday, a special guest from the Pacers is going to join us. It's going to be a blast. You won't want to miss it. Thank you guys so much for listening today. I'm on Twitter at TEastNBA. And the show is at Locked On Pacers. Hope you had a fantastic weekend, and we'll see you tomorrow.